Despite what the titles of some of our videos may suggest, I don't use the word insane lightly, but the 2024 F1 season has been insane. We haven't seen this level of competition since 2012, and while we are a little way off the tight-fought championship battle we saw in that season, there is still plenty of time for someone to attempt to mount a championship challenge. Lando Norris is certainly close enough to give the Dutchman something to think about, though McLaren have declared they won't favour Lando over Oscar in the pursuit of the driver's title, so we'll have to see how that works out. There is a lot to play for over the next 10 races after the summer break, and honestly, any of 4 teams could come out on top. I'm George, you're watching F1 Reverse, this is Don't At Me, the show where I get to give some real opinion on what's happening in F1. So stick around as I try to work out what's going to happen after the summer break and give you my predictions for the rest of the season. When I was thinking about this and kind of writing my notes and kind of coming up with a concept for the video and thinking about what I wanted to say, I really wanted to come up with something nice and positive to say about Saba because they really need some positivity, but it's tough. They have just not been good at all. Valtteri Bottas is in the ever uncomfortable position of 21st in a 20-car championship, behind Logan Sargeant as well, remember. The other side of Logan Sargeant in 19th place is Zhou Guanyu, who's only beating his teammate thanks to an 11th place finish at the season opener, beating Bottas's 13th place finish at Monaco and Montreal. Honestly though, I don't think you can really blame the drivers for how badly they're doing in the Drivers' Championship. You could probably put Max Verstappen or Lewis Hamilton into that Sauber and they'd struggle to score points. The truth is that the car is absolutely awful. Their one trip to Q3 this season was back in China, and the best result came even earlier than that, so it's not like there's even any sign of a comeback coming anytime soon. With Sauber leaving Formula 1 for good at the end of next season, this is a really sorry way for a great and historic F1 team to bow out of the sport. I would probably stake my house on the fact that they're going to continue to sit dead last in the championship, and I give Logan Sargeant better odds of scoring a point than either Sauber driver. And again, that's not because I think Logan Sargeant is better than either of them, I just think the Sauber car and team are that bad at the moment. Just as a side note though, despite Bottas being out of contract and dead last in the championship and probably staying there for the end of the season, a post on his Instagram which featured an Audi R8 emblazoned with his racing number 77 on the side could be an indicator that he'll be sticking around for Audi's entry into F1 in 2026. For a brand new team in brand new regulations, having Nico Hülkenberg and Valtteri Bottas on your team could be a lot worse. There's a lot of experience there and they're certainly going to help the team kind of establish themselves and find their feet. So, it might not be the end for Bottas just yet. Let me get it straight out of the way and say that I'm throwing Aston Martin into the mix here. As much as I hate to say it, Fernando has made another terrible career decision by turning down Mercedes to stay at Aston Martin. Since they announced that he'd signed a new contract, their performance has just completely plummeted. While it seems unlikely that anyone will catch them from the chasing pack, you can't throw Aston Martin in along with the top 4 teams anymore. They're just simply not in the same class. It's a pretty sad situation for a team that showed so much promise last year, and even at the start of this year they look like they could become competitive at the front of the grid again. While the rumours of Adrian Newey joining the team will continue to swirl and Honda selling their engines to them from 2026 is very exciting, neither of those things are going to make an iota of difference this season. The only way that they're going to finish anywhere other than 5th this season is by moving down the championship table, not up. And the only way that's going to happen is if VCARB manage to pull off an incredible second half of the season. Or maybe actually Haas for that matter as well. Though for either of those teams to overtake Aston Martin, it would require some pretty incredible form after the summer break, probably picking up those 10th, 9th, 8th place finishes at every race, potentially even more than that, and it would also require Aston Martin to completely fall out of the points finishing positions as well. Which, to be fair, is entirely possible if Haas and VCARB both start to perform. In terms of the Drivers' Championship though, there are positions to be gained for the Haas drivers and the VCARB drivers as well. Yuki Tsunoda and Nico Hülkenberg are both currently on 22 points, just 2 behind Lance Stroll. Nico Hülkenberg in particular has looked absolutely rapid this season at times, and has been in Q3 way more times than he should be allowed to be in a Haas car, and he has 2 6th place finishes as well. He's been incredibly impressive over the entire campaign in that revitalised Haas lineup. For Yuki Tsunoda, he is potentially still in the fight for a seat at Red Bull next season, depending on how Perez performs, so he's got plenty of motivation to put in some really good performances and get some big results. Lance Stroll, on the other hand, has, well, basically no reason whatsoever to perform. He has a permanent seat at a team who, even if they wanted to fire him, couldn't. He could probably not show up for the rest of the season, I don't know, claiming to start a tennis career like was rumoured last year, and they still wouldn't fire him. I expect both of them to pass Lance Stroll pretty quickly after the summer break, I think. Further back, there's Daniel Ricciardo, who has improved in recent races, but with Alpine improving as well, he's far from safe in 13th position. His 12 points may be double the 6 of Pierre Gasly, but the French team have looked kind of racy again since they changed the front suspension and front wing in Monaco. Esteban Ocon is only a point further back as well, so there's not that big of a gap for Daniel there. A couple of good results from either driver could see them overtake Ricciardo, or a couple of good results from Ricciardo could see him open up that gap far enough that he's out of reach of them. However, while both Alpine drivers have already got contracts for next season and there's not really much on the line for them apart from personal pride, Daniel is desperate for a ride next year with no contract in sight at the moment. This really is the last chance for the Aussie, who, to be honest, only made it back to Formula 1 because Christian Horner had fond memories of their time together when they were both at Red Bull. While I don't think Daniel will actually get caught by either of them, they will close the gap, and I just don't see Ricciardo putting in the performances required to find himself a seat on the grid for next season. I think that in the Constructors' Championship, we'll see the bottom 3 of Saba, Williams and Alpine probably hold position. Nothing will change at Williams this season. They're as likely to score no points for the rest of the year as they are to get some. Above them though, I think that what's been happening this season at Haas under Ayao Komatsu has been incredible. I think they'll catch VCARB, though it will be close, and neither team are going to get anywhere near Aston Martin, as funny as that would actually be. He won't admit it, of course, and there's bound to be some Ferrari fans who are going to have a go at me in the comment section for saying this, but how much must Lewis Hamilton be regretting his move to Ferrari right now? I know it's Ferrari, and every great driver has to drive there, but if he wants to win that record-breaking 8th driver's title, Ferrari do not look like the place to do it at the moment. Charles Leclerc's Monaco curse? It seems like he made a deal with the devil to break the curse, because before, the whole world seemed to be against him winning at Monaco, but now the entire world seems to be against Ferrari ever winning again. Of course, that's this year at least. Ferrari's form has taken a nosedive since that incredible but completely uneventful win in Monaco. They haven't exactly done a lot wrong, but they were never really that competitive against Red Bull, and one big upgrade for Mercedes and McLaren have seen both gain an edge over the Scuderia. 2 podiums in 6 races since Monaco is the worst return of the top 4 teams. They might hold 3rd in the Constructors' Championship at the moment, but I have absolutely no doubt that Mercedes will overtake them as the season continues. At the moment, they're in that really awkward position where they're not fast enough to challenge those ahead of them, but they're also not slow enough to worry about those behind them. In England, we'd call it the Everton Cup, which is in the Premier League, when Everton always seem to finish 7th, where they're not good enough to beat the teams ahead of them, but they're also not bad enough to worry about the teams behind them. With that in mind, I expect a lot of lonely races for Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc as they see the Red Bulls, the McLarens and the Mercedes just kind of drive off into the distance and never really see anyone in their rearview mirrors, apart from maybe Sergio Perez. There is talk that next season they'll be copying the Mercedes suspension setup and they might find some form again, but that's not going to do them any favours this season. The inevitable slip to 4th position in the Constructors' standings will see them finish in a worse position than the year before, 2 years in a row now. And while Pope Vasseur may have been heralded after managing to convince Lewis Hamilton to join the team, the Tifosi won't be impressed with how their season has developed, considering how competitive they looked early on. So, we're left with Mercedes, McLaren, and Red Bull. Since Monaco, each have picked up a win, one going to Oscar Piastri, two going to Max Verstappen, and the Mercedes pairing splitting the other three. Currently in the Constructors' Championship, Red Bull hold a very slim 42-point lead over McLaren, who are on 366 points, with Mercedes exactly 100 points further back. In the Drivers' Championship, Max Verstappen still holds a pretty reasonable lead at the top of the championship and has been joint top scorer alongside Lewis Hamilton since Monaco. I think at this point it's really important to remember that after the summer break, the car upgrades tend to be pretty slim on the ground, especially now that the budget cap's in place. Most teams will have one more big upgrade at the absolute most, but most of the work that they'll be doing is moving on to next season's cars instead now. This is especially true this year as well. Work on the 2026 car can legally begin on the 1st of January 2025. The teams aren't going to want to spend too much time on the 2025 car, which is going to be scrapped at the end of the year, when they could be spending time on the 2026 car, which is going to be brand new regulations, and is going to kind of give them a starting point for the next 5+ years of Formula One at least. Saying a good starting point for new regulations is absolutely vital. I mean, just look at how Red Bull have basically dominated for 2.5 years since the last one, or Mercedes, who dominated for 7 years when the last lot of regulations changed. So next season's development for the 2026 car is so much more important than any work on the 2025 car. So what that means that after the summer break, teams will be focusing on the 2025 car while they can, and 2024 will probably be forgotten about for the most part. So I don't see any one team suddenly shooting ahead in terms of performance after the summer break. Of course, now I've said that, someone will turn up after the summer break with, a brand new car. Mercedes will refit the zero pods and all of a sudden dominate the sport. But there's nothing I can do about that really. Now the big question that everyone is kind of asking is, can anyone actually catch Max Verstappen? Based on recent results, Lewis Hamilton seems the best place to try and shrink the gap to Max Verstappen, but his deficit of 127 points over the current championship leader means that actually catching Max and overtaking him is pretty much impossible. Finding 12.7 points a race more than Verstappen over the next 10 races, it's just not going to happen, unfortunately. Even if he won every single race, including the sprint races, and got the fastest lap in all of them as well, he wouldn't mathematically be guaranteed the championship title. So, yeah, it seems out of reach for Lewis, definitely. But while his chances of a final title at Mercedes before he goes to Ferrari are as good as zero, there is still a lot to play for both Mercedes drivers in the Drivers' Championship. George Russell will definitely be eyeing up Sergio Perez, probably as well as both Ferrari drivers, which could potentially see him finish as high as 5th in the final standings, much better than his current position of 8th. Hamilton, on the other hand, can definitely still finish 2nd. Lando Norris's faltering first lap performances has seen him drop a lot of points, which he potentially should have won. Oscar Piastri, on the other hand, is coming into his own in a very competitive McLaren car. He drove really well to secure 3rd across the line at Spa, which obviously then got bumped up to 2nd after George Russell was disqualified. His win the race before in Hungary was spoiled by Lando Norris and the McLaren pit wall kind of messing around with team orders, but it was taken nonetheless. If McLaren hadn't compromised Oscar's strategy, which led to all that mess around, and they did that to help Norris fend off Hamilton, then Oscar would have led the race from lap 1 all the way through to the end, and it would have been a really impressive first win. Oscar's currently 32 points behind his teammate, but personally, I really back him to catch Lando before the end of the season. Piastri has looked cool, he's looked calm, he's looked really collected in a very competitive car. He really reminds me of like a young Kimi Räikkönen, actually. He definitely looks more Scandinavian than Australian, that's for sure. I don't think anything's going to faze him. I think he's just going to turn up, he's going to look fast, and he's probably going to leave with big points finishes at every single race over the rest of the season. And then, of course, Max Verstappen. Can anyone catch him? If it was going to be anyone, it would have to be Lando Norris, but Max has been here before, he's fought championship battles, and he has all of that experience, especially from that 2021 battle. And most importantly, he has a 78-point lead with 10 races to go. So mathematically, Lando Norris could win every single remaining race, take the fastest laps, win all the sprint races, and Lando would win the championship no matter what Max did. Assuming Verstappen did finish second in every single race and sprint, Lando would secure 83 points more than Max, which would see him win the championship. Does anyone really think that's going to happen though? As incredible as it would be to see this Drivers' Championship really go down to the wire, it would require some flawless driving from Norris, which he hasn't shown he's capable of, and some off days from Verstappen, which he almost never has, certainly not regularly enough to give Lando a real chance of catching him. As the checkered flag falls in Abu Dhabi and the season comes to a close, I think Verstappen will be champion, followed by Piastri, then Norris, then Hamilton, Leclerc, Sainz, Russell, and then in 8th place will be Sergio Perez. While recent results might indicate that George could catch the Ferraris, he still needs to make up 50 points just to get Carlos Sainz, and I don't think this Ferrari slump is going to last forever, or at least it's not going to be bad enough that he can overturn that difference. Hamilton will run the McLarens close, but I don't quite think close enough, and Piastri, which is the driver he's closest to, looks like the real deal. I think over the remaining 10 races, he's going to prove to be too much for Lando Norris, and I think all this talk of a title challenge might actually have got to Norris a bit. I think that's potentially contributing to his poor first lap performances. He's kind of worried about Verstappen, he's focusing on beating Verstappen to turn 1, and other drivers are just making the most of it. George Russell and Oscar Piastri, both perfect examples of that in recent races. In the Constructors' Championship, McLaren have 2 performing drivers, Red Bull don't. It's kind of as simple as that. McLaren will take the Constructors' Championship, but the battle between the other 3 is going to be really tight. I think Mercedes will catch up with both the Ferraris and the Red Bulls despite how far back they are, but I wouldn't be surprised if it came down to like a single-digit difference between all 3 teams. I think the big problem for me is Sergio Perez. Verstappen can drive as well as he likes, but he can't carry Red Bull on his own if Perez isn't going to be a single one of their competitors for the rest of the season. Only twice in the last 8 races has Perez beaten a McLaren, a Ferrari, or a Mercedes that has finished the race. He did it once in Austria when Charles Leclerc's race was ruined on lap 1 and he had to do a first lap pit stop to repair a front wing. And then he did it in Hungary when George Russell qualified in 17th. Though, to be fair to Sergio Perez, he did qualify 16th on that day, so I guess he actually beat George fair and square there. Though he only got 1 point over George because Russell secured the fastest lap. I think it's 6 points to 5 they scored in the end. If I had to give a prediction, I think it'll end up with Mercedes in second, ahead of Red Bull and Ferrari, but again, it's going to be stupidly close between the 3 of them. Anyway, that's my opinion on it all. I know this is called Don't At Me, but I'm sure if you haven't already told me why everything I've said is already wrong in the comments section, you're furiously typing those reasons now. I'll enjoy reading those comments later. I'll see you next time.